Today we're diving into the legendary GTX Titan. We'll take a closer look at its specs and see how it holds up today with a series of demanding titles and benchmarks. Is the original Titan still good in 2024? Let's find out. The predecessor to the GTX Titan was the GTX 690. In 2012, the GTX 690 was a Titan on its own, built on the Kepler architecture featuring two GK104 dies on one PCB, totaling in 3072 CUDA cores with a base clock of 915 MHz and 4 GB of GDDR5 memory in a 2x2 configuration, the highest in its class for the 600 series GPUs. Later in 2013, with the release of the new 700 series GPUs, the Titan lineup was here, replacing the dual-die GPU configurations of the previous 90 spec cards. The Titan also built on the Kepler architecture, at this time featuring a single GK110 die with 2688 CUDA cores, a base clock of 836 MHz, and a total of 6 GB of GDDR5 memory. Let's tear this GPU down for a quick cleanup and repaste. For the GTX Titan, I tested 3 popular titles and benchmarked 8 different titles. Let's get the Titan installed and see how it did. Since support for this graphics card is no longer available, the latest driver version is 475.14, which was just a security update for the driver. It also came out in 2024. The highest resolution I could get out of this card was at 1440p at 144 Hz, but that's mostly due to it only being DisplayPort 1.2. The first game I tested was Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3. This is at 1080p with low settings, just trying to get something as close to the 60 FPS target to get a decent playable experience. As you can see, the GTX Titan has managed to stay around 50 to 60 FPS. Not a great playable experience, but at least it's playing a modern title. The next game I tested was Fortnite's Battle Royale. This was at 1440p on performance mode. Jumping out of the school bus, you can see the FPS stayed at about 100, and as I get closer to the ground, the FPS starts to rise. On the ground was a little more interesting because in the sky it was around 100, on ground we're somewhere between 150 and 220 FPS. The GTX Titan did offer a very playable experience at 1440p performance settings on Fortnite. However, I ran into one major issue, and I think that's because of the drivers. The game crashed. Now what's the point of a high performance GPU? Well, to test it on Crysis. This is Crysis Remaster at 1440p medium settings.
You're approaching a KPA radar station. Find a terminal and access their tactical network.
The game was very playable, staying around 50 to 70 with a target zone of 60 FPS. The first benchmarks was 3 marks time spy. I ran this 2 times in 1440p and 1080p. The 1440p scored a 2,955 and in 1080p scored 4,558. In the FPS benchmarks, I used a Ryzen 7 3700X 16GB of RAMs at 3200 megatransfers, the GTX Titan on driver 475.14 at high settings, both in 1440p and 1080p. The game scores go as the following. Time Spy, it scored 18 FPS and 28 FPS. Metro Exodus, 23 FPS and 29 FPS. Red Dead Redemption 2, 20 FPS and 25 FPS. Rainbow Six Siege, 48 FPS and 75 FPS. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 32 FPS and 46 FPS. BioShock Infinite, 101 FPS and 160 FPS. Far Cry 5, 37 FPS and 52 FPS. And Chernobyl Light, 33 FPS, 46 FPS. So there you have it, the GTX Titan, a true legend in its own time. While it certainly shows its age in modern titles, it's still capable of holding its own in older games. It's fascinating to take a look back at this piece of history in gaming hardware. Thanks for watching and like and subscribe.